In 1,200 days, the Titanic, which only made 2 passes, which did it sink on April 10th, 1912. 112, this was the day when the world's largest and most expensive, the best ocean liner, the Titanic, was ready to begin its maiden voyage. One that day, the Atlantic, the ocean was very calm in the hurricane period. Until 15 on board. Passengers had already boarded, and millions of people were waiting for the mail. They stood to watch the Titanic's maiden voyage begin. Neither the passengers nor the millions of people who bid farewell, neither the Titanic crew nor anyone else knew that the ship is going to leave soon. It's been 6 mistakes since I made it. Mistakes have been made that. The worst accident that has ever happened to a ship. Welcome back once again to Discover Mystery Videos. Today, viewers, you will learn about 6 mistakes made by the most expensive, most luxurious, and most powerful ship, Titanic of its time, which, if not for the Titanic, would be famous in the world today. Not because of its crash, but because of its success. What were the 6 mistakes that took 40 years of experience to make? Even those who had the experience of operating 107 ships did not notice these mistakes. And neither did the company that manufactured the Titanic, Barland and Wolff, who had manufactured more than 500 ships before the Titanic. The construction of the Titanic began in 1977, nearly 3 years and the labor of 2,000 workers. The ship was ready. The ship was completely ready. But the testing phase is still pending. Trust in it was more than. It went ahead when the Titanic had successfully crossed the first test day. As soon as it passed the test, it was marketed in various newspapers all over the world with the heading Unsinkable the Titanic. The unsinkable ship has been built. The ship's maiden voyage was to begin from Southampton, England, which was scheduled for April 10th, 1912, and its destination was New York. The cost of traveling in the Titanic's economy portion was $30, while the cost of traveling in first class was $150. All the tickets were booked one by one. And finally, the day came when the Titanic was to embark on its maiden voyage. Mistake number 1, at exactly 12 noon, the Titanic embarked on its maiden voyage, and at the same time, the mistakes of the Titanic began to come to light. Captain Smith had received a deadline from the owners that he had to reach New York by April 17th. That is, in just 7 days. That is why the captain had kept the ship's speed very fast from the beginning. And this was the first mistake of the Titanic. Captain Smith, under pressure and instructions from the owners, had to arrive in New York as soon as possible, as this was the Titanic's maiden voyage, and if he did not arrive in New York on time, the Titanic's reputation would be greatly damaged. Be it any vehicle, machine, or ship, there are many operating procedures in them. Speed limit is also a part of these procedures, and that part was violated during the journey of Titanic. The ship went to the port of Southampton shortly after, left so much behind that now it is blue till far away. Nothing was visible except the sea. The Titanic had now sailed for 3 days. Passing France and the island of Man, apart from a brief stop, the Titanic had been steadily moving towards New York for the past few hours. It was the evening of April 14th. The sea was silent and still. The dam was closed, which reduced visibility considerably. That same night, another ship, which was only a few hours ahead of the Titanic, had its captain warn the Titanic about icebergs floating in the sea. Experts believe that this warning was given at least 6 times, but the captain did not listen to the warning. Due to the negligence of the operators, very important warnings were missed. It was probably normal for them, but this was the second mistake of the Titanic crew. Because the Titanic was the first luxury ship of its kind, and there were many VIPs on board. That is why most of the Titanic crew was busy serving first-class passengers. If these warnings had been taken seriously, then the next. The whole scene is different. 3, no mistake. The ship's speed was too high, and they missed a very important warning. The Titanic was now rapidly and fearlessly increasing in range in the icebook, But now the Titanic can also be saved from the accident, because the ship's guards were alert, which was also an ice book. They were ready to give the information to the captain after seeing it from a distance. But they did not have one thing to see it from a distance, and that thing was binoculars. Yes, the watchmen were alert, but they could not see the iceberg from a distance due to the lack of binoculars. And this was the third mistake of the Titanic. Captain Smith was informed of the iceberg when the ship's guards reported that there was an iceberg, the size of a football field right in front of the ship. But it was too late because the iceberg had come very close. Because ships often encounter icebergs in the Atlantic Ocean, for no such icebergs can be. Big ships can handle it easily, perhaps Captain Smith thought so too. As soon as he received the news of the iceberg, Captain Smith ordered the ship's engines to be shut down and at the same time ordered the Titanic to change course. Of course, Captain Smith tried hard to avoid the iceberg. The distance was so short that it was useless to do anything. The iceberg had now hit the center of the Titanic. But there was still a lot of hope for the Titanic to survive. There was still hope that the iceberg would not damage the ship's hull or that it would break off on its own without hitting the ship. And that might have happened if the Titanic's fourth mistake had not worked. Experts believe that the rivets on the Titanic's body were not made of steel, but of cast iron. The function of these rivets is to hold large pieces of iron together. But since cast iron is softer than steel, that is why the iceberg hit the Titanic's hull. Those throwbacks opened due to pressure, and then the thing Captain Smith had feared happened. Mistake No. 5. The Titanic had hit an iceberg, the size of a football field, and now the bottom of the ship was starting to fill with water. This dangerous collision killed the entire crew and passengers. The Titanic had been alerted, and at the same time, the owner of the Titanic, Joseph Bruce, who was on the ship, had also started to fill the Titanic with water. But there was still hope for the Titanic to survive, because the Titanic was designed in such a way that even if 3 of its floors were filled with water, it would still not sink. There was room for a total of 32 lifeboats on board, but due to negligence, only 20 boards were kept. There were 1,500 passengers and only 20 boards. There was a lot of entertainment on board the Mastic. Number 6 and a few people wanted to board the boats. At 45 minutes past 12, the first emergency boat, the ship was launched into the sea, but here another mistake was made. In the midst of chaos, the ships were launched into the sea without being fully loaded. In most of them, first-class passengers were given priority, meaning that the wealthier ones were put on board first. If more passengers had been put on the ships, there would have been less human waste. Now the ship was sinking rapidly into the sea. At 2:18 p.m., all the lights on the Titanic went out due to a short circuit, and the next moment the ship broke into 2 parts. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes for the Titanic to completely sink into the sea, and 1,500 people drowned in the cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean. I drowned and died. Let me tell you one more thing. Let's say that the water temperature at that time was -2 degrees Celsius, meaning that even if the passengers jumped into this cold water, there was no chance of survival, because a human being cannot survive for more than 30 minutes in such a low temperature. It is said that the number of people who died was more than 1,500. It was quite high because many of the people who knew the crew had boarded the ship without tickets. The largest number of survivors were children and women. On the other side was Captain Smith, who spent all his time saving people's lives, and he was the last man on board. On the other side was Captain Smith, who spent all his time saving people's lives, and he was the last man to jump from the sinking ship. I hope you will like and share this Discover Mystery video. Thank you very much for your loving comments. See you in the next wonderful video.